have that going. Okay. So welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, we will be getting started here in just a few minutes. If you have any comments or questions, please use the chat function. I will be in the chat helping moderate and posting some information in there for all of you. So please use your voices in there. We want this to be an active discussion. I see Jane's already starting that conversation for us. So thank you, Jane. We will have a Q&A session towards the end. So if you do have questions, if you enter them into the chat box, I will keep track of them, and towards the end, we'll try to get to all of your questions. If we don't get to all of your questions, we will record them and see if there's another way that we can get an answer or a comment to you. But to just give you a little bit of a start on this, if you're following us on Twitter, you can continue this conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag NTCEDI. We just posted it on the Nursology Theory Collective Twitter. And you can tag Lucinda, Canty, and Pat here, as well as the Nursology Theory Co. And I will put those links in there for you so you can have access to that, so we can continue this lovely conversation.
Oh, are you going to drop those? Okay, there we go. That's great. Let's put them in chat, and we can even, I'm going to do some live tweeting right now.
Perfect. Well, that's exactly what we need. So, and then if you just want to sit and listen, that's perfect too. Both are perfectly appropriate. Okay, so I'm going to let everybody in right now. We are recording, just so everybody is aware. Already have about 50 people in the room, so welcome everybody and happy Friday. My name is Chloe Litzen, and I am one of the members of the Nursology Theory Collective who's hosting this event today with our wonderful Dr. Lucinda Canty and Patrick McMurray. We're so lucky to have them a part of our team, and they're going to have some really wonderful conversations today about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and the future of nursing, which obviously all is very near and dear to our hearts if we're here today. Just to kind of begin and give you all a quick background on this event, we did have a previous event earlier in this year on June 12th. If you are interested in that event, I will put that link in the box for you so that you can watch that at a later time if you have not had a chance to see that yet. But to begin, before we get going, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous land that I am on, which is of the Coast Salish people, the traditional territories, and specifically the Nisqually and the Squaxin Island people. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and at any time, if you have any questions, I will be your go-to person throughout this event. My email, if you need it, is clitzen@email.arizona.edu, and I will also put that into the chat box. To begin, I just wanted to go over some ground rules for everyone who is in the event, which is just important for us to cover in the beginning so that we're giving our time and respect to the people that have taken time out of their day to have this very important conversation with us. So if you could, while you're in this meeting, please mute yourself and turn your video off just while we're in this so that the bandwidth can go towards the videos of the presenters and keeping that a safe space. Like I previously said, please write your questions in the chat box and they will be addressed towards the end of our event today so that you can have your voice in this conversation too. Please be respectful and thoughtful in the questions that you're asking and the comments that you make. Understand that any defamatory comments, racist or otherwise, you will be removed from the event right away and we will follow up with you. This is first and foremost a safe space. And please consider your own positionality and the perspectives that come with your positionality during this event. If thoughts come up, if anything you feel like saying, reflect upon that. It's really important in this space to be open to learning, seek understanding, and practice active listening as much as sometimes we all like to comment, and I know I do. Please reflect before you react and accept and support what the presenters have to say today. And, you know, people are likely to make mistakes. I do all the time. and fumble in these conversations, and that's okay. That's part of this practice and it's part of learning, and just practice giving everyone grace during this conversation, whoever it may be, whether it's a presenter or a questioner or myself. Please avoid stereotyping and making any assumptions about individuals and social groups. And if you need to step out or step away during the conversation, that is perfectly okay. Know that we are recording this event and you can come back to it and enter in that space when you're ready at a later time. Understand that this is part of only of a beginning of many lifetime of work, and every day we need to do this work to make our world a better place. And lastly, remember, it is not the speaker's responsibility to tell you what to do. It is important that we are seekers of knowledge, and that includes looking at the resources that we have to ask questions sometimes, even though it is important to ask those questions if you do not know the answer in the first place. So the focus today will be on what Dr. Canty and Patrick have to say for us today, with the lovely time that they are willing to spend with us during a pandemic and during the end of the school year. So thank you both. I'd like to introduce first Dr. Lucinda Canty, who is has her PhD she has her PhD and she's a certified nurse midwife and assistant professor of nursing at the University of St. Joseph. I will let her introduce herself more formally. Dr. Canty, would you like to take it from here?
Okay, sure. Thank you, Chloe. So my name is Lucinda Canty. As Chloe said, I'm a nurse midwife. I'm also assistant professor of nursing at the University of St. Joseph. I have been in nursing for 30 years and I love it. I started my nursing education at Columbia University, where I received my bachelor's, my master's from Yale University, where I specialize in midwifery, and just received this past May my PhD from UConn, University of Connecticut. And the focus of my dissertation, or a title, is It's Not Always Rainbows and Unicorns, the lived experience of severe maternal morbidity among Black women. My research interests are maternal mortality, severe maternal morbidity, just reducing health disparities in reproductive health, and also addressing diversity in nursing from the nursing education standpoint, but also our student population in the workforce. I have experience in just doing community programs with adolescents. Recently, this past September, I was involved with Overdue Reckoning, addressing racism in nursing. And this was a 5-week discussion that we had. And we also have programs that are stemming from that I'll talk about later. But one of the most important things that I've learned through this process is, first, that I was not alone in my experiences, but also I found a lot of allies, people who want to make a difference in addressing racism in nursing, may not know how, but are coming with a good heart and wanting to see a change. And it also showed me that we can have honest conversations about race and racism in nursing. Okay, so I'll turn things over to Patrick. Pat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. You guys know me because I like to run my mouth on Twitter about community colleges. I am a nurse from North Carolina. I am a second-generation nurse. I was educated via the ADN pathway, and I am a big advocate of community college-based nursing education, whether that be ADN or practical nursing education. I work as a clinical nurse at an academic medical center, UNC Medical Center in North Carolina, where I also function as a float pool nurse. So my background is as a cardiovascular intensive care nurse. But I now work as a float pool nurse, where I always say I play in everyone's sandbox, except for with mamas, babies, and children. I love them, but I would just be terrified. So that's what I do clinically for work. And then I also work as an adjunct faculty member teaching at a community college where I teach pharmacology to LPN and to ADN students. And we just finished our semester, which was very harrowing and very difficult. And we all came out still liking each other. So that was a success in my book. And I also teach clinical for LPN students at a local school here in the Central North Carolina area. A lot of my scholarship and my platform centers around, again, community college-based nursing education and the importance of maintaining that pathway, given the societal factors that we see and the barriers that people have to access in higher education, even outside of nursing. But in addition to that, I'm also really interested in how we can nurse in new ways and to do things differently in nursing. Very much a kind of burn it all down and start again kind of person. But I know I believe in a controlled burn, not a raging wildfire. But I believe things need to change in nursing, and so that's the work that I've assigned myself to help be a part of that change in whatever way I can.
Nice.
And so I think now we're going to move on to our discussion. So, when we introduced this, when we came upon this concept about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to, identify and discuss this issue, realizing that it's a systemic issue, that the lack of diversity is a result of something. It's the result of a larger issue. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in the diversity piece and not realize the reason we have to have these conversations is because there's a larger problem going on overall. And so I think a lot of the work that we have to do is both realizing that there's a need for diversity, but asking ourselves why is it that we have to have these conversations? Because once we start asking ourselves why, just like any good scientist would do, we start getting deeper into things, into the why of why we are here, of what we're doing, and of how we can make things different.
Yes, and we have to look at, because everyone thinks it's just about, okay, let's just increase diversity, everything's going to be good, we're all going to get along. But really, when you look at it, it's a systemic issue. From even going way back to high school, how students are prepared, then admission policies, and then they're in the program, there's language that's used on exams that aren't culturally appropriate. There's populations that are being kind of like not even talked about. So I think that we just have to look at all of these layers. And the surprising thing to me was that it's not only on that undergraduate, when we're looking at education, it's all the way up, whether you're an associate degree program, bachelor's program, master's program, doctoral program. And I'm basing this a lot on my personal experience and those of my colleagues that look like me. It's throughout. And then you get into the workforce and there's a whole nother beast. So it's like we have to look at all of these pieces, and it's so complex. But if each of us just start to open our eyes and understand that, we could have started to look at why we don't see diversity the way that we should. And for those that do make it through, that only one sometimes, how did they make it? How did they survive? We have to talk about it.
Yeah. And I think that too, and I apologize, I forgot to do my land acknowledgement. I inhabit the land of the Tuscarora people of North Carolina, and I come from a place where also the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, the lands traditionally belong to them. I apologize, I forgot that.
Yes, and myself as well. Pequannock, with Pequannock people in Windsor, Connecticut.
But when we think about all of these things, I think we have to kind of, and it kind of moves us to the next part of our discussion about the individual work involved in this, because no one's going to be able to hand it to you. And again, it goes back to this concept of, we didn't create this problem, so I can't tell you how to solve it. I mean, we can work together. I'm always down for working together with people, but I can't tell you how to solve it. And it requires you being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that something I recently saw on Twitter was this tweet where it said, teach me about racism and how to be an activist, but don't hurt my feelings. And if you come with that approach, then you're not going to be very effective, and you're not going to really put in the work. So we have to remember that it's okay to be uncomfortable, and that being uncomfortable is not always, it does not have to be a threat. Now, I'm not saying that sometimes people will weaponize discomfort sometimes, but when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, discomfort should be expected, and it should not always be viewed as a threat. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, is it a threat? Is this really a threat to my person, or is this a threat to my way of thinking or my position in society?
Yes, because it's important to know that when we're talking about diversity, you have to talk about racism. They don't coexist in their own world. Diversity, lack of diversity is a result of racism. But to talk about racism is very painful, very scary, but it's something that we have to do. And one thing, just working predominantly white colleagues, is that, again, they get very nervous. But then when we phrase it that nobody wants to be a racist, and a lot of your behaviors are not even considered racism in your eyes, but it's the system that we're all a part of. And we have a system that oppresses people of color. And we do have to acknowledge that. And sometimes acknowledging that doesn't have to always say, oh God, they're saying I'm a racist. That's not what we're saying. And I'll give you a perfect example. So you were looking at how we discipline students or how we support students in the clinical area. So there could be two students, and I'm going to be just very blunt. There's a white student and a Black student, and I'm just using this as one example. The white student gets support, gets nurtured from their clinical instructor, gets help, they build their skills, their confidence, they're successful at the end of the semester. The Black student, all of a sudden their issue, or maybe they're just disorganizing their thinking, that situation, that clinical instructor, again, uses that against the student, and then starts complaining to the course lead, to the director, the chair of the department. Everybody knows that this student's having trouble in clinical. So that student is like, pretty much everybody knows, and that's intimidating to the student. And then the student is struggling because not only are they trying to learn nursing, they know that other people know what they're going through and they're very insecure. We know someone who's a sophomore, who's 20, 21, we know they're very insecure. Think about ourselves at that age. But anyways, that person is treated differently. And so I was just in a meeting just talking about this situation as an example. I had two concrete examples. Was very general, left the meeting. Someone in the meeting was, they were wondering if I was talking about them. They weren't even on my radar, but they became so, they felt like, again, I was very general and just saying, we just need a process where every student is treated in a certain way. Let us start with the clinical instructor, see how they could support them before we move up. No one's name was called, but there was someone in the meeting said, oh gosh, she was talking about me, and making it more impersonal. And I'm like, why is someone upset that we're saying, let's create an environment that's safe for all students? So again, she was uncomfortable. That wasn't my problem. She's uncomfortable. She has to evaluate why she's uncomfortable. Again, she wasn't even on my radar. I wasn't even thinking about her. She wasn't even part of this example, but it makes me wonder, what is it that she's afraid of someone knowing? What is it that she has done? So I'm just saying that when we talk about this, if you get in your feelings, you need to evaluate that. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. If you're taking the time to think about it and seeing what that means, that's what we want if we want to address diversity, if we want to address racism. So I'm just saying, that discomfort is not being used to weaponize you, it's being used to increase your awareness. And I can't control your discomfort. You can control that. And you can do what you want with that.
Wow. I love that. I can't control your discomfort. You can. That's I think that's powerful. And I think if we all take this back to nursing, we know healing is never healing. And part of growing comes with a lot of discomfort, comes with pain. It's not always pretty. We think about healing wounds. Nurses are known for our wound care. And we know that healing a wound is it's not a pretty process. Oftentimes it's yucky, things look nasty before they get better. But if you have to keep doing the work, keep debriding, keep changing the wound. And I think it's the same thing. We have to debride those parts of ourselves that will default to making assumptions about people, debride those parts of ourselves that don't think with a critical race standpoint, and debride all those things. And we have to change the dressings of our emotions and of our understandings of the world so that we can pull off that wet to dry and debride out all that old stuff and then put on a new dressing and continue to grow. We know a wound can't heal if there's eschar and there's a lot of dead tissue there. So we have to remove that stuff that isn't going to help us give life to other people, so that we can in turn grow and expand and things like that. But I think, when you recognize where you are in the scheme of these things and what position you have, and it goes back again to the question of like, who are you naturally tuned into? What are you naturally in tune to, or naturally triggered or programmed to believe? I think about my own experiences as a faculty member, someone who is a Black man and who is 28 years old And, you know, I'm in a space that is dominated by people who are a lot older than me, and typically who are white women or white men who are usually a lot older than me. And then I tell someone, I've been a nurse, I'm 28 and I've been a nurse for 8 years. And I get the look of shock, you know, which is not in itself not bad. But I will be with my students, and I have on my students wear one color, I wear a separate color. I have on a lab coat that says clinical instructor. And somebody has come into the room multiple times and said, "Where's the instructor?" And I said, "I'm right here," you know. Yeah. Or I remember one time I went to the school to print something, and they said, "You can't come back here to print." And I said, "Oh, I thought where would I go to print?" They said, "The library." So I go back and I asked my other staff, I was like, "Oh, we have to print in the library now?" And they said, "No, you know, students print there, but faculty don't." So I go back downstairs and I said, "So my colleagues told me that we are allowed to print down here." He said, "Oh, you're a faculty member?" And it's just like, I have on a badge that says, it's a big badge that, you know, and then sometimes our positionality can blind us to very evident things that would help us pick up on these clues. And so I think that's what you have to realize. We often think we have a better handle of a situation and a better understanding of a situation than we do. And sometimes our unconscious biases will have us like just naturally tune out certain people and or naturally place people in a certain category to the point where you really don't see them for who they are, even when all the signs are there. We always wonder, how could they have made that mistake? How could they have made that mistake? How could they have made this assumption where all these signs were screaming at them and telling them this? But that's how, I think if anything, it shows us how insidious bias can be, and how into ourselves we can be, because we won't even recognize
or how we others. Yes, or how we just sit in this. How, you know, like if there was a meeting I went to, and there was it was a national Hispanic organization that wanted to send a student for free to their organization for their annual conference. And everyone was like, "Oh yeah, so, you know, maybe we could, you know, have the students write an essay and we'll choose to select who we want to go." And I said, "We only have one Hispanic student. So who is she going to be writing against to try to get this role?" And they were like, "Oh, we do?" Oh, like they were shocked about it. But when that's not your life, you don't see it, or it's not important to you, you don't notice those things. But when I walk in a room, especially a nursing meeting, a conference, I walk in that room and I always look around just to see, do I see diversity? Do I see a range of, you know, different colors in this room, different personalities, different, you know, whatever. I walk in that space and I always think about that. And it's not because I'm like, okay, I'm going to just go and sit with all the Black people. It's not because of that. It's because I want to see, is this organization welcoming to different shades of people, different kinds of people? So, and for me too, it's a safety issue. When I come into this space, am I going to be safe? Am I going to be seen? Am I going to be heard? Am I going to be looked at like that instructor? Like what Patrick was saying, you walk in that space and people don't think, you know, this is a nursing educator conference. Oh, she's not a nurse educator. You know, it's like we enter a space, we start at the bottom, and we have to work, we have to prove that we have a right to be here. We have to prove and show, look, I teach here. I teach at this university. Like we have to make sure we let that known when other people walk in that space, you know, it's automatically assumed that they're the professor. You know, so it's like we have to kind of like, we have to show who we are. We have to kind of earn to be in certain places where other people don't have to do that. But I say that because it's also our safety that we're worried about. We're worried about someone insulting us. We're worried about someone, again, pretending like, which is just as painful, pretending like you're not even there. They see right through you. You talk, you raise your hand, and nobody sees you. So anyways, it's like we have to look at that. There's a certain way that we have to move in spaces that's not always important. But I mention that because not everyone has to do that. You can just walk in that room and hi everybody, sit at the front table. You could print and not have somebody stop you and tell you need to go to the library. You know, how many of you experienced that where you tried to print and you were treated like you were a student and told to go to the library? So those are just things that we have to think about when we enter these spaces.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, and kind of the last leg of this discussion, we're talking about how this is an individual work, but it is collaborative, and something that Dr. Canty and I and Chloe and everyone discussed is that we needed to frame this, make something really clear, that people of color, or the oppressed, the person that's being oppressed in the situation, or has been historically oppressed, the people who aren't in a position of privilege, they don't owe you an explanation. They don't owe you understanding. You know, they are totally, we are totally consumed with, like Dr. Canty said, maintaining our sense of safety. I can't be worried about how, if my inflection and my tone is right, and if I'm going to come off as an angry Black man, while also worrying about how you're going to feel, because at whatever particular moment, I'm not centering you and giving you all the answers. In addition, we all have issues, and I think that people get stuck on the idea that when we say something about Black people or people of color or people from other marginalized groups and communities, that we're saying our plight is worse than anyone else. And we're not saying that. When we say that, we're not saying that this means that everyone, regardless of their race or positionality, can have issues and struggles, and it doesn't minimize the struggles to recount that I have struggles too. It's just that my struggles, in addition to the regular everyday life struggles, I have these extra list of struggles just because of my positionality, whether it's my skin color, whether it's my religion, whether it's sexual identification, your gender identification, or your sexual orientation, or something like that. Like, you know, whatever your factor is, whatever that thing is that brings you into that marginalized and oppressed space because of the way society looks at you, those are the things, you know, that will I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. Those are the things that will kind of shift everything, you know, and they're an additional burden. And so it's not saying that your burden is less. It's saying that I have those burdens of just being a human as well, but in addition to that, I have this burden that comes from my positionality as a marginalized individual, as a Black man, as a young person, you know. And I think that we have to remember that right now we've made space to make this a collaborative process. We've made space to say, okay, we're willing to conversate, to talk about ways to fix this together, but that this right now may not extend. It may be a week from now, I'm not in a position where I feel like I have to give the answers. And I don't feel like I have to now. But I think it's important to remember that in the isolated moments that someone decides to say, okay, let's have this conversation, let's teach and learn together, embrace it, but don't expect that they're obligated to do that at all times. We've made space for this now, but for our safety, we can't do this always. And I think that's a big thing to remember.
Yes, and we want to have conversations. We want to talk about it, but it's like, do your homework. You know, that student in class that you know didn't read the book, but they want you to tell them everything that's going to be on the exam. We know those students. So just if you come to me and maybe a situation happened, maybe you said something. And again, we all have things where we learn from our experiences. So, but maybe you said something that offended someone, you're not sure why. Think about it a little bit. Don't just say, you know, I don't know why she's mad. But maybe you said, you know, I really probably shouldn't have done that. I really shouldn't have thought a little bit, or you said it. So now what's the next steps? But at least just show that you're doing your homework. Just show that you're acknowledging it. And even now, I still see people who think racism doesn't exist. Even I've seen people who I've seen with my own eyes do things to oppress students, do things to harm students and stress them out. And then they'll sit in the meeting saying, oh, you know, I don't understand what's going on, or they, you know, something's brought to their attention. Oh, I didn't see it that way. You know, I don't, you know, they don't take a minute just to think about it. So I'm just saying, I don't mind having the conversations. I don't mind answering questions, but again, just do the homework. Just understand, just recognize that we're all in the system. If you think that everything is perfect, you know, something is wrong. If you think you're in a university or you're working in a hospital where racism doesn't exist, we're seeing it from the way that we teach our classes to when we're looking at care, the patient care. Like again, COVID has really showed us the disparities that a lot of us already knew existed. But if someone's in that space saying, oh no, I don't think that's racism, or I don't see that, that's a problem. And that's someone who hasn't done their homework, who hasn't even just have taken a minute to look at themselves and where they sit in this. And we all sit in this. You know, and I'm telling you, as a Black woman, I'm in a system where there's policies that impact students, that policies that are structural in nature. And sometimes I don't even notice it. And then I'll see certain things or later I'll think about it. So we're all in the system. So it's not saying that this is up to one person or the other. We're all in the system. And if we want to improve just nursing as a profession and addressing this, we have to do it together.
Yep. And so we'll turn it back over to Chloe right now to move on to our next part.
Well, thank you both. I always am so moved by hearing you both talk. So thank you again for your time, authenticity, and having this important conversation with us. I have a couple questions for both of you that, really spurred out of our last conversation. I think is important for us to have. So at our last event, when we were discussing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, we talked about nursing being an act of justice. And so one of the questions that I had for both of you, and Lucinda, I'll start with you if that's okay. What do you mean when you say nursing is an act of justice? And a second part of that would be, how do we make nursing an act of justice if it is that?
Well, I feel like whether you're an educator at the bedside, it doesn't matter like what area of nursing you're working in, we're practicing nursing. And nursing has roots in social justice. We have roots in looking at and identifying problems and trying to find a solution. We have roots in looking at populations that are marginalized. And again, I'm thinking of Lillian Wald. I'm thinking even of Florence Nightingale. Their roots in looking at populations that needed more, or we need to change how we were doing things. So we're the result of that. And I feel like as for nursing to be an act of justice, we have to look and identify issues. We can't have blinders on. It's just like you're in a town and you're seeing all these cases of chlamydia and among adolescents, you can't just ignore it. We got to find a way to get to them. And especially those people who may not have access, let's find access for them. So I feel just as nursing, it's our role to look at these problems. And again, I'm gonna just say this, whatever level of nursing you're in, whether you have your PhD, whether your master's level, bachelor's, associate's degree, we're nurses and we can identify issues and find solutions. So you see things, don't ignore them, do something about it. And think of those who can't speak up for themselves. Think of those people and what can you do in your role, in your position, wherever you sit in nursing.
Yes. And I agree with a lot of that. I think that I echo the thoughts that that we as nurses our practice is very global, and a Johnson & Johnson event earlier in the week, I said that I view my online work and on Twitter and my discussions as an extension of my nursing practice, because nursing practice is not solely clinical. We've always said that, but also nursing practice is not always just physical and in person. By being scholars, we're practicing nursing. By teaching, I'm practicing nursing, things like that. And so I think that when I function and I approach my social media that way, it is an extension of my practice as a nurse and in my practice as an activist or as an advocate for communities. And when I approach it, when I said that idea about nursing as an act of justice, the idea is that it should be, because it's not always an act of justice. And I think that's the next part that I have to add, is that nursing should be an act of justice, because it's not always. We know this historically. Nursing has done harm, has permitted harm, has done the harm themselves, has turned a blind eye to harm. So the idea that just by de facto, the fact that we are a nurse, that we're practicing justice, that's not a real thing. So we have to make our practice as a nurse an act of justice. And that means that we have to take active steps to do these things. And I also think it means that the way we approach and the framework we approach nursing with, I've always told people that I've approached my whole life from this standpoint, and my whether it's nursing or my volunteer service or whatever, from my family saying, an old Southern family saying of doing right by people, doing right by folks. And if you're doing right by folks, it kind of, to me, it takes that golden rule of treating others, and I said this in the Johnson & Johnson event as well, that it takes the golden rule and it kind of expands it. I don't really think it invalidates the golden rule, but it expands it, because the golden rule tells us to treat others as we wish to be treated. But the thing is that we're all very different people. We have different backgrounds, and we have different understandings of what is right and wrong, or what is, or of how we want to be treated. And so the idea of treating folks right, of doing right by folks and doing right by people, expands the golden rule to saying not only to treat others as you want to be treated, but treat others as they wish to be treated. Because the way I think that I would want to be treated in their situation may not align with what they see for themselves. I can't assume to know what they need in a situation like that. And I think that we can see examples like that with how people, various types of people, will handle a single type of situation. For example, various individuals who identify as Black will handle racism very differently. Some handle it from a concept of, I want to protect myself and remain safe. Some will be very vocal about it. Some will not. So we have to treat, we can't impress upon anyone else that they have to respond as we do. So that's why I like to say we treat other. I saw somebody say, I like that, the platinum rule. I like that. Yeah, the platinum rule is that, yes, we treat others as we want to be treated. And I think it really is saying the same thing, because if I want somebody to treat, if I want to treat somebody else the way I want to be treated, I want people to see me for how I am and to understand me from where I'm coming from. So it's really saying the same thing, but it kind of just puts another spin: treat others as they wish to be treated. And I think that that's something super important for us.
Yes.
Thank you both. And, I think that thought that nursing should be an act of justice, and maybe one day we can make it that nursing is an act of justice always, in my dream world of our future, which brings me to our next question. And I'll go back to you, Dr. Canty, since we're going into a nice little circle here. So how do you envision diversity looking in your environment, in your environment being nursing?
Mm-hmm. So I envision, at first, I just feel like you're not going to just go and get people of color, round them up and just throw them in. I think it's recognizing, like, I want diversity to recognize that we have more to offer than just our brown skin. That we,
Yes.
yeah, because I feel like sometimes people want to throw, or even, I just feel like sometimes people want to throw us in and then say, oh, look, we have a Black faculty. I remember, I didn't even realize I got caught up in the system where every event that had to do with racism or diversity, I was the only one from nursing that was there. And I'm just like, I was like, I'm the only one, we need to change this. And we became a little diverse since then. But I feel like, don't just come to me again just for race, and don't just let me just sit there. And then when there are things that are coming up that I could benefit from, I'm on the tenure track, and then you go to someone else, you don't come to me. And again, this is what I'm looking for when I say diversity. I want people to recognize I have more to offer. That you want help with your curriculum, I can help you with your curriculum. You have a tough topic you want to talk about, I can help create an assignment for that. You have students having challenges in clinical, I have things that can work. I can use simulation to help people see these certain things. I feel like when we're looking at diversity, I just want to say, I want an environment where I'm recognized and others are recognized for what they can offer. And don't just look at me and say, oh, she just knows about that and that's it. Especially if you never had that conversation with me. And I just want that environment where I do have that white colleague, I want them to be comfortable collaborating with me on a project, talking to me, and just checking in to see how I'm doing. I just want that environment where I can again feel safe, because sometimes I don't feel safe. It's like you go in and you're working hard, you're doing all this work, no one recognizes that, and you're worried you're going to slip up with one thing and then they're going to come at you and they're going to erase everything else that you've done, all the changes and things that you have impacted. I just want that environment where wherever someone is from, that they feel comfortable and that they can grow, that they can be supported, nurtured, encouraged, even challenged. I just feel like everyone should get a piece of that. That we should do that for ourselves, but also for our students, so that they can see that they can see these collaborations, or they can see that, oh, look at that project, or they walk in the room and they see a diverse faculty and feel comfortable there. So that's just part of it. I don't want to really get into it. I want to hear what Patrick has to say. But I just want that environment where it doesn't matter where you're from. Again, even for our students, it doesn't matter. Don't just put them on their SAT scores. They struggled in their first chemistry, their freshman year. Don't say that's going to determine what kind of nurse they're going to be. Again, create that environment where they feel safe. They could go to their professor and ask for help. It's not like they're told just work harder. And then another student comes in and you're like, well, sit down, let's talk about it. Let everyone have those same resources and same opportunities.
Yes, and I really agree with that. I think that a large part of our question and the environment I would like to see about diversity, you all know, and I've threatened you last time I said this, one day I'm going to write this paper and I have this framework. So if any of you come out with a paper, I'm going to call you out on it. But I told you I came up with the concept about a diversity desert. And I got this from looking at ecology and the concept of biodiversity in various types of biospheres and various types of environments. And when I think about that and I translate to diversity and within nursing, there are places that have lower amounts of diversity. So deserts can have a lot of diversity, but it's typically much lower. But a rainforest has a lot of diversity. There are a lot of diversity of plants, of animals, and all types of life, inorganic and organic diversity. There's a lot of it in a rainforest. So a lot of times we have these diversity deserts where we have low diversity, even in diversity. Again, remember, this is on a big scale, not just ethnic diversity, but also diversity in people and their lived experiences, the way that they view the world, their religious or personal or social beliefs. All of those things are inclusive when we say diversity, not just ethnicity. But with a diversity desert, you may see a lot of monochromism. So you see a lot of the same color, not just physically, but also in the way that people think and their experiences in life. And I think the best environment is the one that we have tried to create on social media. I'm so glad that I know so many of you, and when we look at a room, I know a lot of you are going, if you look at a room, you're going to look around and be like, wait a minute, who are we missing? We need more of that. We need more people looking around and saying, who am I missing? If you look around and you see and you're on a conversation about nursing and you don't have a person of color or an activist of some other marginalized group on there, and it's all white women or all white men or all white men and women, there's something wrong. I don't care what level of nursing you're at. If it's you're in a group of deans and there's a whole bunch of white women in the dean's room, we need to start saying, why is this? We need to do better with this. And it's not to say that a white woman isn't capable of being in that position, because again, people would like to use that whataboutism. So are you saying that white women shouldn't have the same opportunities? No, because whataboutisms have the purpose of distracting from what is really being said. It's saying that white women just as much and Black women just as much have the right to be here, but historically, it's not been the same. So we're not saying that I remember when we called for a nurse to be on the task force for coronavirus, some people got upset because myself and some other nurses who are people of color, and also some of our colleagues and people who are very veritable allies mentioned that the nurse that's selected needs to be a nurse who's a person of color. And some people ask, well, why wouldn't we get this opportunity? Why does it have to be a person of color? And this is where we kind of have the conversation about historical perspectives on how activism has worked. So let's take Blackness, because I can only speak from my positionality as a Black person, but let's think about anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness exists in every culture around the world. Every single culture, even the ones where everybody has dark skin tones, it exists. And what that means is that sometimes what happens, a lot of times we know that Black women tend to speak up for other people, whether it's their own or whether it's people who don't even share their ethnic identity or lived experience. They will speak up. We have people like Dawn Wooten to thank, that where she spoke up for these immigrants who are being who are being abused and being violated in Georgia and things like that. And we've seen other examples where we have Marie Foster Branch, who was a Black Panther, and she published the book providing safe nursing care for ethnic people of color. And it doesn't just discuss Black issues; it discusses the issues that people who are Latinx face, the issues that Asians and people of Asian descent face. It discusses the issues that poor people face. So we've seen that a lot of times while we kind of center the conversation on why we need a black woman or a Black person of color, because Black women typically will advocate for everyone, but the reverse is not always true. A lot of times a Black woman will advocate for another woman of color, but you will see, because anti-Blackness exists in every culture, the reverse may not necessarily happen. And this is not in every single case, but in large, and it's not to say that Black women are better at it than others, but we think about the positionality of Black women, where they had the Mamie stereotype, the Black best friend stereotype, we have the magical Negro stereotype. All of these are areas that kind of accentuate the fact that Black people, but specifically Black women, typically play these supporting roles in other people's lives. They're there for everyone else. They sacrifice themselves for everyone else, but it's not always returned in reverse. So I think that we have to remember that, and that's an important framework. But also, speaking of this book about providing safe and nursing care for ethnic people of color, it mentions how the philosophy of nursing, there's a commonality of purpose for the nurse's existence and serving all of mankind to the best of their ability with scientific knowledge as the base. But in the history of nursing, we fail to acknowledge that not everyone receives equitable nursing care. And I think that it's true. And when we talk about things like our students, and admissions processes, not seeing them, like Dr. Canty said, just for their SAT score, because we know the researchers told us, we're all capable scholars here. Researchers told us over and over again that where you come from and your socioeconomic status can heavily impact your performance on the exams, and they're not necessarily an equitable measure of people's abilities. So but yet we continue to do this. So if we're in a position, and when we talk about the environments that we want to create, if you're wondering, how can I create this environment? If you know that this is true, advocate at your school. If you're in a position of authority at a school or at your job, to say, this is a barrier, and it's not one that gives everybody equitable access, and we're missing out on a lot of talent. So you have to speak up. And I think a part of this thing is that people want to be safe. And when you're coming and talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, you can't prioritize. You have to, I won't say you can't prioritize, you have to balance how you prioritize your safety versus doing what's right. Because at some point in this thing, we don't have a choice. When you're in a marginalized group, you don't have a choice. If I don't fight, if I don't say something, it's my life, or it's the life of someone who looks like me. Yes. When you're in a position of privilege and power, you get to make a choice. You have to balance where I don't want to stir the pot because it could make me compromise my job. You have to decide if you're going to be an activist and if you're going to be an advocate, it's going to require you to put yourself again in uncomfortable situations. I'm not saying to make yourself, to put yourself in danger by any means, but you have to balance at what point, where are the parameters of what I'm going to allow to happen to my colleagues and and the people in the community that I work in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yes, exactly. And I just want to say, just a part of that is that we all have something to contribute to nursing. We've always been, Black women, and again, I've heard about Indigenous nurses. We have a history. We've contributed to nursing, but our history is erased. We don't see, when I was in nursing school, I didn't see myself in my textbooks. And then when I started doing overdue, I'm meeting nurses that have been practicing, Black nurses who've been practicing for 60 years. We're practicing when there were colored units, things that you only hear about on TV. So I just, I wonder, like, if I heard that in nursing school, how would that have impacted me? Would that have even encouraged me? Maybe I should go straight to get my PhD, because when I saw certain people, I was like, that's a PhD. I don't want to do that. That's a nurse educator. I don't know how I end up in nursing education. I saw nurse educators that would come on the units in their heels and their white coats, their lab coats, talking down to students. I was like, I don't ever want to be that. But I never saw myself. I fell accidentally into education and I love it. I'm 12 years in and I love it. But I just want to, when we're talking about, having a nurse, a Black nurse on the COVID team, it's not because she's Black, it's because she has something to contribute. We never say that.
She's going to speak for more than just herself.
Yes, exactly. Because that's our history. We've always had to take care of everyone else. That's our history. So there was a time we had to work on the Black units with the Black patients because nobody else wanted to work with them. But we also had to work on the white units and sometimes take physical and verbal abuse. So, but I just say that because we have something to contribute. I just feel like sometimes people act like they're doing us a favor by letting us into their schools, by letting us into their spaces. But we have something to contribute, and that needs to be recognized and acknowledged. Because nursing is here because of a lot of what we did. So I'm just saying all of us have something to contribute. We can't just act like there's one people who know what nursing is. And that's the problem when we do have everyone that looks alike. They have this picture, sometimes it's a fake picture of what nursing is. And there's people that I've even worked side by side with, they would have never admitted me into their program. Even when I started teaching, I was very quiet. That quiet Lucinda, that's who they wanted. But I blossomed into something else. And I'm not going back.
Yes.
But I know, but they still had that image. And I was just to fill a space. I wasn't there to really do anything. And I started doing things because I had to encourage myself. And I had to do that for the students that I serve. All students, not just students of color.
Yeah, I think something that I sent to a friend, it was a piece of poetry, and I can't remember if it was by Renata Williams or another artist that I follow, another poet that I follow, but it said that Upil Chisala, it's one of them, and they said that, dear woman of color or dear Black woman, they see you coming and they're terrified, and it's like, and they should be. And it's not to say that we should be afraid, but it's like Black women and marginalized people, again, we're not just talking about just one race, but marginalized people haven't been given a chance. And it strikes fear in some people. If they have the chance to be what I am, where does it leave me? And that question terrifies some people. Wait a minute, if they're equal to me, well, does that mean I have to work harder? Does that mean I have to do all these other things? Does it make me less if they are more? And I think that's a question that we all have to kind of answer in the end.
And that's the question I have is, what are you afraid of? What is it about diversity that scares you? And I've seen some people, I'm telling you, educated PhD nurses, they see Black skin, I've seen them act a fool. And I don't understand. I'm sorry about the terminology. I don't have any other way to say either foolishness is one of my words, foolishness, or they act a fool. Because I've seen people just act crazy. I'm telling you, crazy. You wouldn't believe. If I put a list of some of the things that I just experienced myself, you would be like, what? I've seen people act crazy just because of Black skin, just because someone has an accent, just because someone is from another country. I've seen people act a fool. Even when you chat through email and everything is all good, then you roll up in that meeting, or even in Zoom, you turn on your camera, they're like, oh, she's Black? I've seen them act a fool. Even up until this, people think this happened in the 60s. I'm telling you, this is still happening right now. So, and I just don't understand, what is that fear? When really, why are you in nursing? Why are you in nursing? That's my question.
Yep. And I think and just to kind of go back to my point, so my perfect environment, it means more people looking around and saying, no, this isn't acceptable. The way this isn't acceptable. I need more people to not be satisfied. I think nursing has always struggled with like just doing enough to get by and being in survival mode, and that's how we haven't thrived out. So my environment that I want to do, I want to help, because in the real world we can't turn a desert into a rainforest. Not the way things are now. We can't do it. But in diversity, we can turn a diversity desert. We can water it. We can cultivate it and create a rainforest where a desert once was. And it made me. And we live in areas with low diversity, and that's has a very similar monochromatic profile. It doesn't mean that we still can't do the work of cultivating diversity. And I think as we go into the Q&A, maybe we can delve into that more.
Yeah. Yeah, can we go to Q&A? I see some, I know I'm not supposed to look at the chat, but I can't help it.
Mhm.
I've seen some questions, some good questions go through.
We have a lot of really good questions from ones that were submitted earlier, as well as ones coming in the chat. So if you do have any questions, like I said, put them in the chat box and we'll try to get through them. But Lucinda, Patrick, would you like me to field you some of the questions from the chat box, and then maybe we can enter into some that have been pre-submitted as well?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. So I would just like to recognize Christina, and if I mispronounce your last name, I apologize, Chuck Anyuka. And she actually asked two questions, but I'll start with the first one. She goes, my first question has to do with how one navigates challenges of resistance and dissent from peers or professors when naming anti-racism as related to separate from inclusion, equity, and diversity. She says, I'm finding less resistance from BSN students than from PhD students or peers.
Mm.
So either one of you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, well, I think that resistance, because I always wonder where that resistance comes from. And I think a lot of it is people really just don't know. That's one thing that I'm learning. They really don't know and don't understand. And what I have been doing that's been helping me navigate through is naming it what it is. And sometimes you have to break it down for that person so that they can understand. It's like, for example, saying, oh, that's racist. And everyone gets defensive when you say racist. But if you say, look at this policy. This is an A student and she got an 85 on her dimensional analysis exam and you want to kick her out the program. So it's really like breaking it down. And that's just one example so that people could see, because again, people can't see those structures. Sometimes so for some of us, we've been just doing it so long and then we feel like what we do is right. And somebody was saying how they have these buzzwords. Some of those buzzwords are, well, I shouldn't say buzzwords, but we need to do that for the NCLEX. Or, or the ATI, that's the thing that's going to get them ready. It's like they say these things and that's the only way they're thinking. They're not thinking that this is a standardized test that is unfair to a lot of people. And I've seen people barely make it on the ATI and pass their NCLEX on the first time. But anyways, people get so used to it that they don't want to look behind it. Like, where's the ATI from? Who developed those questions? So it's things like that. It's like, sometimes people don't want to see past it. So unfortunately, to address it, we got to get beneath the surface and really open up and explain it. So when I say, oh, that's racist, people don't understand, they react differently. But when I show them how that policy is oppressing someone who could really be a good nurse, who, this is something that we're doing because we've been doing it for 20, 30 years, that now we need to look at that because things are changing. Sometimes you just have to break it down so that people can see those parts and then they can better understand it. But keep in mind, there's people who are still going to be ignorant and they don't want to hear it. But still, for me, I just keep talking about it and I'll come at them different ways.
Yeah. I think that goes back to the thing about, you have to think about, okay, you have to set up to parameters like, how am I going to balance prioritizing my safety versus the safety of others? Because if one person in the group isn't safe, then the safety is compromised for everyone. So you have to balance, you have to figure out how to balance with that and realize that if you are a person of color or if you are a person from a marginalized group, that you may not have much support. And I recognize that. And I someone who've experienced that. And so a lot of times it means having support outside of your institution, whether it's from your family unit or from other people who are finding a community online like we have. Like we've created Nursing Theory Collective, excuse me, not me, but Nursing Theory Collective was created and I've joined it as a part of it. And I found people, like-minded people, so that even if I don't have support in my environment, I know I have support somewhere. People I can bounce ideas off of, people I can talk to. And I think it kind of lines up with, Wyona asked me a really good question about when you say that, treat people as they want to be treated, how can we figure out how our students want to be treated. A part of that is just, never making an assumption, but communicating with somebody. If you know you have this kind of oppressive policy and a student comes to you, your first thing shouldn't be, well, this is the policy, there's nothing I could do. a question that you can ask that is inviting and opening and saying, I realize that this is a difficult, this puts you in a difficult position. How can I support you? What are your ideas about how I can support you? What do you need? Even if it's, because even if the result is unpleasant, I think it starts to show people that you are acknowledging the system is not working in our favor and that this is not right. And that not only that, but I want to help you navigate the process, whatever it means in the end. What can I do? Tell me how you're feeling. How can I support you? You don't realize how those little things, when you're the only Black nurse in a cohort, or Black nurses in a cohort, how it feels. And it's gonna feel strange. And I think you have to realize that, again, these people from marginalized communities and groups don't owe you their trust, and they likely won't trust you. But I think the idea is that we make this a practice. And if we make this a thing that we keep doing, and we're not just isolating it, and we're not just being superficial, that people will start to see that, and eventually someone will come along and trust you, and trust that you have their best interest at heart, and trust that you see them for who they are and where they are.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, because again, you want to treat, you know, people want to be treated, we say we can look at things differently, but there's certain things that you have to think about when you're working with students, when you're working with your patients, and sometimes you need to start with some empathy first. But there are some basics that go across all cultures, all races and ethnicity. One is just to be treated with respect. Just take a minute to be heard. You know, like to listen to someone. People want to be heard. That's universal. So just look at the basics. You know, just that simple kindness. You know, like you have someone who's having trouble, you know, you're just walking by them, you know they're having trouble, you keep walking. I don't care where you're from, you know something is wrong with that. So if you see a student struggling, just take a minute. I have students that they just want to voice what's going on. I had a student who wanted to drop a class because she had a 79 average. She needs an 80 to pass. I took 1 minute to talk with her. I'm like, you are in a good place. You have 2 weeks to prepare for this exam. You could do it. That student emailed me today. First, she said, thank you. I felt defeated. Now I feel like I can do it. And she ended up getting an 80.5 average. And she was like, I almost gave up. And again, I didn't even think I did anything special. I just listened to her and just said, okay, let's look at how you're studying. And I just say that because there's some things that are foundations of nursing. Just look at those core things that we learned in foundations. And again, of course, culture can change a lot of those things, but just a basic humanity. Sometimes I don't even see that. I don't even see that from people who, again, who have their PhD, who is teaching students. I don't see that. I see just, I'm just saying, of course, there's ways that we have to treat people. We got to be careful. You want to treat people the way they want to be treated. But there are some basic foundations that I don't even see in nursing education. Just take a step back and take a minute. Just take a minute and listen. And that's how you're going to learn. I've learned a lot from my students. And I think that's why I'm still teaching.
Same. And then especially when you teach, I teach a lot of Black and brown students. Those are the people I teach, who the people who society didn't want to go the extra mile for. And it's so interesting because people are mentioning Teaching to Transgress, which I think is a fantastic book. But also Dr. M. Rabelais did the book club a little while ago, and they talked about that book, White Tears, Brown Scars, if I'm not mistaken. And in that book, it mentions a point, and it's so powerful. It says, why is it that Black and brown people are so are automatically tuned into or programmed to feel pity when white women cry? That we feel emotion, that we're willing to drop everything to comfort and console them. But when the reverse happens, it's not returned. So why is it that, you know, we have this student, we have to think about that in reference to our students and to our coworkers. We have a coworker and people say, you know, oh, two coworkers, let's say they both recently were divorced and they both have 2 children and they're trying to navigate that process of being a single parent now. And the one is late sometimes because their child goes to school out of their district, or whatever, or they live in a rural territory because that's all they could afford. And so they have a much longer commute. And there's sometimes a 5 minutes late, but we're willing to label them as, oh, she's always late. And my thinking, the way I think and the way I practice, if I had something like that and I was a manager, I'm like, okay, I realize this is a good let's look at outside of the situation. This is a good nurse. They performed well. Patients really appreciate them. In reality, it's 5 minutes worth me ruining their life and ruining this relationship when I know that but I'm willing to grant grace to someone else over here because the world is programmed to see white women and to have empathy for them when they cry, when their tears are shed. But it's not when you see a woman of color cry and share tears or get frustrated, we're tuned to just be like, oh well, that's how society is it's really how it's programmed, and we have to question that. And
Yes.
yeah, I mean, there's really not even much more to say. That I'll field
Yes.
any other questions that you have.
Yes.
I did, Chloe, I did have one that was sent to me, and it was asking about how do we go transition from diversity desert to rainforest. I think about it, we know biggest thing that a desert is lacking is water, and then the water in this case is the change, and it's us investing and water comes and heals, water comes and it cultivates growth, water comes and just like a storm can either be very destructive or it can set the tone for new growth afterwards. And so I think that when you think about that, pouring water into this environment, it means pouring this effort. It means that I have to be a part of it. It means that faculty have to be a part of it. And the water is a lot of different things, but it's all action. I think action is the biggest thing. We talk and we talk and we talk and we write articles and we do blog posts and we have storybook discussions, but the action is the water. We need this tide of water to flood the desert so that we can create this rainforest that we need to have.
Because I think that people want to do good. They want to do right. And people are like, well, that's in my heart. This is what I want to do, is in my heart. But I want to see, I can't see what's in your heart, but I can see your actions. And someone, Andrea Kennedy, she asked if anyone has done a structural racism audit in their nursing program. That's an action that can lead to further action. And again, when we're looking at structural racism, it's so subtle, but it causes a lot of harm. So, but it takes a time. You really have to look at yourselves, your programs critically to do that. But that's the only way we're going to really see major changes.
Well, thank you both. As always, I'm always so inspired by both of you and the conversations that are going on in the chat right now. We have about 22 minutes left of our session. And if anyone has any other questions, please put them in the chat in case you have something that you are ruminating on. I'm going to pull out some pre-sent questions if you're both okay with that. And we got some wonderful pre-sent questions and they were thematic in nature. So I'm going to work through each category and see what we can cover today. We had some education focused questions just to begin with those. And this came from an experienced educator. And this question was, I am moving to rural agricultural Northwest Kansas and will be full-time faculty for a well-established PN program. As a white cis female faculty member, what are some suggestions from the group about how to better actively recruit people for this program to include folks beyond the area's demographic? Are there specific actions I can take to make a program in this area more desirable and more safe for people?
I love that question. I love that question. And I always say the first question is, what are the things in place that are causing people not to even go there? Because a lot of times I hear that old thing about, oh, we couldn't find anyone qualified. That's why we're not diverse. There's a lot of qualified people of color. I'm going to let you guys know that. PhD prepared, DNP prepared. I'm letting you know they're out there. But the question is, why are they not going to your institution? And I'm going to tell you something that I'm still kind of like thinking about. I have been approached by some universities. I'm not going to mention any names, but I know one of them is not safe for Black people. I'm going to be perfectly honest. And I've seen that with my own eyes. People who go there, they stay for a semester. I've seen people leave after a semester. I've seen people leave after that year. I'm like, come on now, what's going on? And I'm given an earful. But we don't want to go places where we're not safe. And when I say that we're not safe, when we go in, we're going to get supported in our teaching. For all of us, starting out as educators, we've had those classes or assignments that just fell flat. And you want someone that's going to be there to say, okay, let's look at that. You know, this happens, let's support you. You don't want someone to be like, well, you know, maybe you shouldn't teach that class. Are you sure you want nursing educator? You want to be an educator? You don't want someone who's going to tear you down. You want someone to lift you up. So people, again, when we're looking at it, I'm going to just break it down with being safe. I want to know that when I go there, I'm not going to be attacked in a meeting. I want to go to an environment where if I have a student issue, I can talk to someone who's going to help me through it, not throw me under the bus because of it. I also want someone who's going to encourage me to do more. A new project comes up, don't go to people who are new that have no experience. Come to me because you know I can contribute something. Don't just act like I don't exist in the department. When I'm in the meeting talking and I bring up a suggestion, I've seen people like ignore it or they tear it down, they change the subject. And then the next meeting, they're bringing it up like it's their idea. I can't even tell you how many times that's happened. But when you're in spaces like that, you don't feel safe. I want to go just like a lot of you go, you love your position. Even if you don't love it, you have challenges, you know the chair or your nursing dean is going to protect you and support you. There was a time I didn't have that. I was scared to death. There were several times I was like, I'm going to leave this. So I don't want to be in an environment that's like that. So even though you're looking at ways to recruit, you got to change some of those structural things that they're supported. Don't, when they do something, you're pulling up a policy saying, well, the policy says you need to do this, or this is mandatory, and it goes against your teaching philosophy. Those are environments that I don't want to be in. So you have to think, again, we're always looking for our safety. We have homes, we have families. We want to be able to be in an environment where we could feel safe and okay, going to work. So when I come home, I can nurture my family because I was nurtured. Or that even if I had a bad day, I could go home and know that, you know, my family's going to be, you know, still be good because I know tomorrow when I go back to work, my dean is going to help me work this out. So we want that. And where we're working, and if we can't get that, we're not going to go there. And I could even go in a space where I'm the only Black person, and I've been in spaces like that where I'm still supported. So it can make it work. But I'm just saying, you got to think about those little pieces. Look at things that make people want to leave and start thinking about, okay, so if I have someone comes in who's a person of color, I want to make sure they're not offended by this practice that we do and change it. A lot of you are in positions where you could change it. So I'm just saying, just look at that. You got to look at all of those pieces. If you want people of color to go to your environment, it's not about finding, when people aren't applying, it's not because they're not qualified, is that they're qualified, but they don't want to deal with foolishness.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the, and I appreciate what Dr. Canty said, because I think a lot of it is realizing the power and the position and the privilege that you hold to, again, create that tidal wave of action. Even if it starts as a slow trickle, because you're the only one doing it, you have to be putting water into this wave to make this wave of change happen. We all have to put it in. And I think that part of that, for example, I'll tell you something that really took me off guard. Dr. Rachel Walker invited me to speak with her accelerated BSN students in their nursing research course in her Badassery in Nursing speaking series that she developed, or that they developed, excuse me. But they told me, you know, I really want you to come here and speak. And I said, well, what am I supposed to talk about? And they told me, you know, whatever you want. And what I appreciated was when they introduced me to their class, they said, this is Patrick McMurray, nurse educator, nurse clinician, nurse scholar, nurse activist, nurse theorist, nurse. And it was the first time that anybody has used those words in reference to me, calling me, I've always talked with people in the Nursing Theory Collective, and we all believe that all nurses are theorists and all nurses are scientists, but everyone else doesn't. Like, to see someone who has the positionality of being a PhD program director give me a voice and validate my voice where I am now, despite anything else, someone validating my voice in that way, that's the most powerful way of modeling these things that you need to see and these changes that you need to see. So we have to model. If you don't have diversity where you are, bring in diversity. Bring in guest speakers who come from varied backgrounds to speak with your students, even if it means you have to put in extra work. Even if it means it's just a 15-minute conversation at the end of the class. Today, we're just going to talk with a random nurse every week. Why can't we all have these series where we bring in nurses from all these different backgrounds, all these different things to speak? That's something with Zoom. The thing is, everybody knows how to use Zoom now, so we know how to make these things happen. So you can bring in diversity where there is none, or encourage diversity where there is none. When you have a textbook and it only mentions the grand nursing theorists that almost always are from like what 30 plus years ago, say, I know the book says this, but supplement, even if it's just a 15-minute conversation saying, I want to take the time to recognize that there are a lot of nursing theorists and people who are theorists in their own right who aren't recognized as theorists or who aren't mentioned in this book, like Sojourner Truth, like Harriet Tubman, all these kind of things, and mention these other theorists and doing the work to search for theorists who are people of color. A big conversation that we have in Nursing Theory Collective is that nursing theory is very monochromatic. It doesn't feel like it belongs to, it feels like it belongs to a very specialized subset within nursing, primarily white academic nurses. I never felt like nursing theory belonged to me until I found this group who said, no, it belongs to you, and we're going to give you a voice, and we will position you as a theorist in your own right. And I think that is the most powerful thing. And I think something I've appreciated Dr. Dillard Wright, she's always said that all nurses theorize all the time. So we can't say that theory is just one thing and that there are different types of theories. So we have to be inviting, and we have to invite other people into the theoretical space and into the academic space, people who've typically not been invited to that space or not been given the spotlight. Again, when we look at anything, our textbooks, a panel we're on, our faculty, our workforce, our colleagues, and we don't see diversity, again, that diversity on the big scale, not just with skin color, but skin color as well. We need to start asking, how can we make this different? How can I improve this? So it can be little things like bringing in people to speak, or highlighting nurses of color or theorists of color, even if they don't have a PhD, even if they don't. And I think that that's another conversation, because credentialism is really a part of something that continues to perpetuate hierarchies and to perpetuate elitism and classism and essentially racism. Because we tell people, if you don't have these certain credentials, then your voice isn't as worthy of being heard. You know, we can acknowledge you, and when you have accolades and when you have all of these different titles and these different things, credentialism is racism. It is. It's a part of all of it. Intersects. It's all intersectional. So we have to think about whose voices we decide to give value, as always, and do we only value voices when they have certain credentials or when they have certain positionalities? Because sometimes we can think that we may value somebody and their race really may not be a concern for us, but we only value them if they have the same level of education as us. So there are people who honestly don't, race is as big of an issue for them, but credentials are. And so if you don't have credentials, they don't hear your voice naturally. And some people do this intentionally, some people don't. So I think that we have to think about that. And even when we talk about things like the DNP and the PhD, there's a lot of, I don't know what the best word is. There's a lot of bad blood. There's a lot of bad blood about this. But we look at this, and I tell people, when you start thinking about this, and it is elitism, somebody just put it, it's elitism, but you think about this, people have a problem with this degree. But also, when we look at the PhD and the DNP, which one is more accessible to nurses who are people of color? Which one is more accessible? And so it's like, you see how all this kind of intersects. People of color tend to, if they're going to get, and not saying that people of color can't get a PhD, obviously Dr. Canty has proof of that, but the one that a lot of people find accessible, or that aligns with what they want to do, it may be the DNP, but people want to disparage the DNP for various reasons. And this is a separate conversation outside of, you know, trying to focus and focus the DNP and help better clarify how we all can work together. So this is a separate conversation. But sometimes intrinsically, we think, just like my argument about the ADN, historically, people of color have accessed nursing from diploma programs and the ADN. But we have efforts out here that seek to essentially segregate people who have an associate's degree from people who have a bachelor's degree. If you have an associate's degree, you can't work here. And we have to really question, okay, is this about ability? Because we know that they both have the same level of licensure. And when it comes to clinical nursing and entry-level nursing, whether you have a bachelor's degree or associate's degree, a new nurse is a new nurse. And so we have to think about these things and these systems that we've set up, that we've allowed to let us think this isn't racism, but we have to kind of look at it like, really, we're telling this person, oh, you can't work here. And it's mostly in the areas that pay better, these larger towns, these larger cities, or where you find that these people who maybe an ADN nurse can't access work in the community that they may live in because they couldn't afford, or for whatever reason, the barriers existed that they couldn't get a bachelor's degree immediately.
Yeah, and yes, and that's an important, we have to have a further discussion about that, degrees, because that's an important issue. But there's a question that I want, if it's okay, someone asked about, what are recommendations about, or are there any recommendations about how to hold people accountable? It says for faculty development and training. And the problem is the people who need it the most, they don't go for training. They don't see a problem with the racism, and they're usually the main perpetrators. But my thing is really now is speaking up. When you're seeing something happen, when you see a faculty member, because sometimes it's faculty on faculty crime, but also when you see a faculty member do something to a student, we have to start speaking up, because a lot of times that behavior is nothing new. And sometimes, again, we have to name it and we have to put it out there so that it could be addressed. So sometimes people are like, well, that's not me, but they see somebody doing something to a student. You have to speak up. And then again, I'm just answering quickly because of time. And the other part was, what are practices that have been helpful in recruiting diverse faculty? The most important thing is when you're looking at a person of color to come to your organization, you can't just be like, oh, we're trying to increase diversity. That's why we're interviewing you. What about looking at their resume, learning about them? Someone approached me and they were like, you have experience with curriculum development. You have experience in the clinical area. You also do research. We need someone like you. Not only did it make me have a big head, I'm not gonna lie, I got a big head, but it made me say that this person took time to research and understand who I am. And my presence in itself, not only will it improve your program, but I'm adding diversity to your program. And hopefully your students will see me, and that will increase diversity in the student population. So it's diversity really it can bring a lot, but let me come because of what I have to offer to your program, and start with that. The person knows you gave them a tour. They didn't see not one Black person. They know you want to increase diversity, because I want to just make sure I put this out there. People of color, we know what's going on. We see it. We know that there's problems. So you're not telling us anything new, but telling us more than just what's on the surface, our skin color. Say, you know what? I liked your research. Someone that even looked at my dissertation and was like, and again, my head getting big, because I was like, but I felt like they saw me. Yes. They saw me as a nurse educator. They saw me as someone who could come and add value to their program. So when you come in, and please, if you're going to recruit, you get them in there, you have to support them. You have to support them. Yeah. So that there's that tenured person who causes issues. Don't let her mentor that person coming in. Find someone who's been there. Again, sometimes because a lot of places aren't diverse, I may come in that organization and you don't have someone else of color, but that this person understands. They do training, they do this and that. They'll be a good fit. And if they can't even do it by themselves, have other resources. Unfortunately, even if you have to go outside the nursing department. But once you get them there, don't just leave them. Don't let them be that only face on your website. You see all these different pictures with the same Black person in there. You don't want them to feel like that's why they're there, so that you could put them on their picture up. Again, you have to show them the value, but you have to keep them there. because we know teaching is stressful in itself, especially if you're helping someone who's in a DMP program or a PhD program, or even that undergrad. It's very stressful. So I don't want to deal with having to fight to be in that organization and feel like I'm alone. So if you have someone, you bring them in, support them. And again, we're still evolving how we deal with racism in nursing, because no one wanted to talk about it for years. Now we're talking about it. So keep in mind, this is a learning process, and show them, I have some people of color coming in, students of color. What can I do? Let me educate myself to see what I need to have in place to retain these students. Not only recruit them, retain them. Because that's the other piece when we're looking at diversity.
Yeah, and I think it's my last little bit of here, because I know we're running out of time, but I think that the work of validation goes a long way. When I was at Dr. Walker's class, another person that was there messaged me and told me, I want to say thank you for the work that you and Justin Fontenot wrote. I actually cited your paper, the paper that you both wrote, in my dissertation, and I was just like, ugh. Like you said, to someone that validates, like, I see you, I see your work, and I'm not just saying it, I cited your work in my dissertation. And to see people like Chloe, who in her email tag has nursing as an act of justice from our last talk, little things like that. They're genuine, because they're not just about flattery, but someone tells me and they can talk in depth. I really appreciate it how you did this. And I think too, we have to kind of shift that into saying, who do we uplift? When you see ADN students and BSN students on the floor, do you also tell the ADN student, I think you would make a great nurse and theorist? Do you also tell the PN student that I think you would make a great nurse and leader? Do you also tell the PN student that I think that you should go and get your PhD, just like I would tell somebody that's in a BSN program, do I think you need to go get your PhD or your master's degree, or I think you need to go for trying to be a charge nurse? Who do we uplift? Who do we naturally uplift? And it's okay if we realize that I could do better in expanding the pool of who I uplift. Who do we tell, you know what, that was really brilliant. I appreciate it how you recognize this. I appreciate it you speaking up. So much of this work is a work of validation. And once we validate people, it tells them that we see them, it tells them that they're important, and it tells them that I want you here. So if we start from the standpoint of, again, doing right by folks and validating their existence and validating their presence and their right to be here, whether it's as a patient, as a nurse, as an educator, we're getting a lot of that work done from the get-go.
Yes, and please, if you have a student, another faculty member that you work with, if you have someone that's telling you they feel like they're experiencing racism, take a moment and listen, because I have to tell you, for a lot of us, we don't say anything until we thought about it for a long time. And for some of us, we're still afraid to bring it up. But I think that's the only way we're going to see change. But just take a minute. Again, you don't have to have all the answers. Just let them tell you what's going on, and do a little research yourself and try to understand. Because please stop being dismissive, because this is a serious issue. And for a lot of us, this is our everyday experience. So I'm just saying, just open your minds and just be open to, again, making change. Even taking a moment to listen, that has a significant impact. Because a lot of times we're traumatized by the racism that we experience, and that we're experiencing in nursing. It's heartbreaking. So I'm just saying, just take a minute. Educate yourself, but listen and see, especially if you keep having student after student telling you, one student, I still think you need to listen, but you got 10 students telling you the same situation, you got a problem in your university.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to thank you both for your time. And I think you lead perfectly to our ending, which is where all of your work starts. It's already started by you being here, but call to action from us to you. And so the first thing that we want that Dr. Canty, I, Patrick, and all of the Nursology Theory Collective invite you to do is join the Beyond White Fragility event that is going to be hosted this January. And I'm going to be putting the link to that in the chat for you to join. There'll be three days of that event. And Lucinda, would you like to tell a little bit about that event for everybody?
Okay, so The white fragility. So when we first did Overdue Reckoning, we didn't allow white nurses to talk. We wanted women of color to share their experiences because we feel like sometimes we're in spaces where we start to talk about our experience and a lot of times it's dismissed or, are you sure? And this and that. So what we found was that a lot of us were experiencing the same thing and it empowered us. So now we're doing a second part of that where we're having a discussion based on the book, White Fragility. So, and it's going to be led by Nanette Massey, she's phenomenal. And she can let us have a conversation where we could really get meaning out of it. But at this, we are going to allow, again, we only did it that way for Overdue Reckoning because for so long, our voices have been, suppressed. But for White Fragility, if anybody can come, is really to stimulate a conversation so that we're just going to keep trying to move forward. And again, we're looking for solutions. We're looking on how we can make a change. So we are doing that.
Thank you. And so I also put in the resource list that was created by the Overdue Reckoning on Racism group that you can turn to for resources to learn about racism nursing and different things. And if you look earlier in the chat, Dr. Peggy Chin also included some assignments or some worksheets you can do that's related to that as well. The last thing that I'd like to invite you to do is after your participation today, and you've started this process, we want to encourage you to go out and invite a friend into the conversation. Maybe your friend that's most different than you, who doesn't see the world the same way. If we continue to talk to each other, that's wonderful to have these conversations, but we need to extend the olive branch across our worldviews to try to understand the world and create collaborative understanding and advance our worldviews together. So extend the olive branch to someone who needs to hear this conversation. Share the video. Maybe share your experience on Twitter if you're willing to, and tag us at Nursing Theory Co. and using the hashtag NTCEDI so we can see these conversations occurring in live space, and we can continue these conversations in all of our spaces like Jane talked about in Boston, and using these conversations as a starting place to a lifetime of work. So I believe that's all we have today. I will let Dr. Canty and Patrick say any last words, but I want to thank both of you from the bottom of my heart for the space and the vulnerability that you have given all of us today with your presence. We're so grateful for you and the time that you've given us and your knowledge and your experience. And we hope that all of us can move forward with this knowledge to really make the world a better place and advance nursing to become more equitable, just, inclusive, and diverse in the way that we've talked about it today. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. And I want to thank everyone for coming. And these conversations are kind of tough, but we got to keep having them.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope that we can, I forgot about how we will share that resource list, Chloe, but I think that that'll be a good starting point. And I think I said, remember that this is a time, and at this time we've made space for this, but that given the time, I want everyone to remember that everyone's going through a hard time right now. People of color are going through a hard time right now. Whether you're a person of color or not, we're all going through a hard time, and that our fuses are a little short right now. Our tolerance for exclusiveness and everything is short right now, understandably. So remember that you have to give people the space that they need, and that not every moment is a time, and you can't expect this always, but we've made space for this today. And I'm so thankful everyone had such good questions. I couldn't keep up with everything, but you all had very good questions, and I'm so glad you were engaged. And it's okay to not agree, or for some things to strike you and you be like, I don't know how I feel about that. I want to validate you in that way. It's okay to be like, I don't know how I feel about that, and to be open to understanding and exploring yourself more, So, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you both. And I will send out an email later today once this is solidified in Zoom, and you'll get the recording, and I will also send out the chat for you. And then we'll send out a resource list with all the resources that everyone suggested within the chat as well. So, and we can build on it too. We'll keep it as a living document that we can collaboratively work together and share with. So, but I want to extend a happy holidays to everybody. Happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, Merry Christmas, whatever you celebrate, have a happy holiday and have have a restful holiday and soon to be happy 2021. Thank you all for your involvement today, and please take care of yourselves and your loved ones.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Apparently,
From
we're
Boston.
headed over to Twitter for the after party.
Bye,
So
Chloe, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Reed.
Okay.
Patrick, I made you host, so if you could cancel the recording.
sure.
It'll ask you, I think, if you can save to the cloud. So
So stop cloud recording.
yeah, just press the recording button and then it should allow you to